A high roller, a man who ran in Hollywood circles, was cruising around LA in his convertible. In the passenger seat was a club owner buddy, and they were on their way to an auction. Now, this friend of his didn't just own any disco. He ran the Fake Club, one of the hottest private nightclubs in 1980s Hollywood. The driver said he needed to make a stop, so his friend waited in the car. Moments later, a bag of cash was tossed onto the seat. This crazy bastard just robbed a bank. Too bad, the dye pack hidden inside the loot exploded. They must have looked like the Blue Man Group driving in that convertible. The unwitting head honcho of Hollywood nightlife couldn't leave the house for weeks. The driver of the car was none other than Eddie Dodson, the polite bank robber dubbed by the media as the Yankee Bandit. A well-mannered crook? Sounds pretty contradictory, right? Well, Eddie Dodson was just that. He managed to turn this wild concept into his MO. And man oh man, did this guy know how to party. Eddie getting ready. Eddie Dodson was born in Shelby, North Carolina on December 24, 1948. Shelby was a small, close-knit community that embodied the post-war American spirit of the 1950s and 60s. This period was marked by a mix of traditional values clashing with major social changes. Shelby, like many small towns, was a place where everyone knew each other, and life crawled at a snail's pace. The local economy was primarily based on manufacturing and agriculture, which provided a modest but stable living for most of its inhabitants. Young Eddie was raised by his mother and grandmother after the early loss of his father. These two women were the central figures in his life, providing him not only with care and affection, but also instilling him with Christian values that they held dear. Regular church attendance was mandatory, and the biblical teachings often centered on themes of kindness, virtue, and community. These lessons were meant to guide Eddie through life, giving him a moral compass to navigate the complexities of the world. But the influence of his mother and grandmother went beyond religious teachings. They also taught little Eddie the importance of politeness and respect, qualities that, oddly enough, Eddie would carry into his life of crime. He incorporated his upbringing into his personality, and it influenced the way he robbed banks later on. As Eddie grew older, the cultural shifts of the 1960s began to get woven into the fabric of Shelby, North Carolina. The civil rights movement, the rise of the counterculture, and the Vietnam War all played a role in challenging the traditional values he knew. For a young person like Eddie, these were not just distant events, but currents that influenced his thinking and behavior, pulling him towards a path that diverged significantly from the teachings of his youth. As Eddie moved beyond high school, the wider cultural events of the 1960s began to sweep him along a different path. The new influence was very different from the strict upbringing he had. It pushed him into a journey full of surprises, one that shaped a lot of his life as an adult. High times. After graduating in 1967, Eddie Dodson became a full-fledged hippie. He began experimenting with drugs and eventually started selling dope. His activities eventually caught up with him, leading to an arrest in 1972 on drug-related charges. Skipping out on his court date, Dodson fled and ended up in Los Angeles. In LA, he opened an antique shop on Melrose Avenue, where he had many celebrity clientele. This was his ticket to Tinseltown, a key to the city, so to speak. It was the beginning of the transformation from a small-town boy into one of the most notorious bank robbers in American history. Known as the Yankee Bandit, since he often wore a Yankees ball cap as part of his disguise, Eddie's new persona was characterized by his courteous demeanor during heists, setting him apart in the annals of American criminal folklore. The courteous crook. Eddie Dodson's career in crime hit its stride in the early 1980s, reaching a peak in 1983 when he embarked on an unprecedented spree of bank robberies. During that single year, Dodson was responsible for robbing an astonishing 64 banks. His biggest day was November 29, 1983. He pulled off something crazy. He hit up 6 banks in just 4 hours and got away with it. Moving swiftly between locations in Century City and Sherman Oaks, he managed to amass nearly $250,000. $250K back in '83 would be around $790 grand today. Not a bad score. This incredible stunt made everyone take notice. It basically cemented his rep as the big dog of bank heists. Dodson had a unique style when it came to robbing banks, and it worked like a charm. Instead of being all loud and aggressive, he was known for his polite and quiet approach, using a starter pistol that was kept hidden to stay low-key. This way, he avoided violence and didn't freak people out too much, which helped him pull off heists smoothly without drawing attention. His calm and courteous MO gave him a bizarre kind of respect and adulation. It's like people couldn't help but admire his manners, even though he was stealing money. Stars and prison stripes. Eddie Dodson's personal life was full of glitz and glamour. He was a regular at Hollywood parties like the aforementioned Fake Club. Eddie rubbed elbows with artsy and mainstream celebrities, a who's who of entertainment and art. Just take a look at some of the regulars at the Fake Club. Then located on Cahuenga Boulevard, just north of Hollywood Boulevard. But the charmed life came with party favors. Eddie became dependent on a type of potent smack called Persian heroin. It was widely distributed up in San Francisco, so it must have been pretty exotic skag to score down in LA. His addiction became so severe, Eddie needed a constant flow of money to satisfy his daily fix. Faced with the overwhelming cost of maintaining his drug habit, Dodson found himself in desperate need of getting more and more money. This financial pressure ultimately pushed him into the world of bank robbery, seeing it as a solution to all his problems. His shift to criminal activities was not primarily driven by a desire for wealth or fame, but his addiction, which was like a caged gorilla, quietly doing push-ups, waiting to break out. And when it did, it needed to cop. Now. However, Eddie Dodson's criminal career came to an end. His luck ran out, and he was finally apprehended by law enforcement on February 10, 1984. After a standoff, the cops nabbed him at the Farmer's Daughter Motel on Fairfax Avenue. He was convicted and sentenced to a 15-year prison sentence. He ended up serving 10 of those years. After his release from prison, Dodson found a stable and unexpected role as a caretaker at Jack Nicholson's ranch, reflecting his previous connections and a brief attempt at going straight. But the stability was short-lived, as his ongoing battle with heroin addiction led him back into a world of crime.
Oh no, not again.
His friend talked him into going to rehab, but Eddie couldn't stay sober and robbed 8 more banks, jacking $8,500 from each financial institution. He soon got caught and this time got hit with a 120-year prison sentence. The landscape had drastically changed. Advances in bank security technology significantly hindered his efforts, and his latest crimes were less successful than his earlier exploits. He got sloppy and paid the price. As his health deteriorated, so did his appearance, with the press calling him the down-and-out bandit. This new chapter in his life was totally different from his earlier days as the Yankee Bandit, living the high life through his ill-gotten gains. Things took a sad turn for Eddie Dodson. He passed away at age 54 at UCLA Medical Center from hepatitis C. In light of his liver infection, the court recanted his 120-year sentence and gave him 46 months, with 6 months to be served in a drug rehab facility. It closed the books on a life that had seen some wild swings, from being a notorious and romantic criminal to battling personal demons and an illness. Between July 1983 and February 1984, Dodson held up 64 banks. This spree set a new record for the number of bank robberies pulled off in such a short time, making him one of the most prolific bank robbers. The man, the myth, and the chaos. Eddie Dodson's psychological profile shows a complex mix of personal values and external influences that led him to a life of crime, despite his non-violent nature. He grew up with strong values like respect and politeness, taught by his mother and grandmother. However, as he got older, the 1960s counterculture movement was in full swing, and he got caught up in it. Freedom, creative expression, and flouting society's conventions by sticking it to the man was Eddie's way of life. Outwardly, he may have lived the romantic ideals of the 1960s, but Eddie was also a junkie and was motivated by the need to satisfy his thirst for H. But was this the only incentive behind his crimes? Did Eddie D have an endgame? Did he want to escape to paradise with a girl on his arm, riding off into the sunset? It's hard to say. You can say yes. The need to fund this drug habit pushed him to make decisions that were against the moral teachings of his youth. Heroin addiction can be overpowering, taking over a person's decision-making and a whole personality. But despite choosing a life of crime, Dodson maintained his inherent politeness during robberies. He used a starter pistol, never a real gun, which he never openly showed, to minimize violence. "Thank you, have a nice day," and complimenting tellers wasn't said in a mocking tone. This guy really acted as if he just got a coffee from Starbucks. This approach suggests that while his addiction drove him to commit crimes, he still tried to maintain some of his core values, avoiding violence and showing respect during his heists. Dodson's story is a clear example of how addiction can change a person's behavior, leading them down a path they might not otherwise choose, all the while struggling to hold on to some decency. The movie Deal-er. The life of Eddie Dodson hit the big screen with the release of Electric Slide in April 2014. The biographical crime film stars Jim Sturgis as Eddie, showing the complexities of this charismatic figure whose life story drew widespread interest. The movie was inspired by Timothy Ford's Gear magazine article, The Yankee Bandit, The Life and Times of Eddie Dodson, World's Greatest Bank Robber. Electric Slide really gets into the nitty-gritty of Dodson's intense and dramatic crime spree, particularly focusing on the years 1983 to 1984, when he was making the biggest waves. While the film takes some creative liberties, it manages to convey the essence of Dodson's life, his nice demeanor, his criminal ingenuity, the parties, and his personal struggles. The film shows the complexities of Dodson's character and his unusual approach to bank robbery, providing audiences with a nuanced portrayal of one of history's most courteous bank robbers. Hope you found Eddie Dodson's story as intriguing as we did. If you enjoyed the tale of the Yankee Bandit, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more from Crush Unit. Want to see the other guy who made LA the bank robbery capital of America? Click here